We want to welcome to the show. He needs no introduction, but he is John McClain, best known to NFL fans, Houston Texans fans, football fans around the world as the General. John, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Brian, around the world, huh?
How far we have come in the last few years. But John, it's a pleasure to have you on Talk Sport.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. There's a brilliant things to get into, but let's get into it. In many ways, the hottest team in the NFL. And speaking of around the world, how far the Houston Texans have come in about a year. You covered D'Amico Ryans as a player. You know better than anybody. You know what D'Amico was as a player, what he was as an assistant coach, and what he meant to the Houston Texans last year. What makes D'Amico so special, so unique? How has he been able to do this? Because there was a ton of hope, there were expectations, but this is his first job. People have a lot of buzz, and they fail in the NFL. He did the exact opposite. He was the perfect coach at the perfect time. You know him. What makes him so unique as an NFL head coach?
I've known D'Amico since the day after he was drafted in 2006, the first pick in the second round, was voted NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year. And today, a lot of guys hide in the training room and the weight room. D'Amico was right there at his locker every day to talk to anybody who wanted to ask him questions. And I remember at different points of his career telling him, I was like, man, you got to think about coaching when your career's over. And he never thought about it. He was just thinking at that point till he played. And then when 6 years with the Texans, 4 with the Philadelphia Eagles, then he went home as a kind of a lark, a favor to his old high school coach to go help him coach his defense. And he was doing that when his former Texans assistant, Robert Saleh, who's now the head coach of the New York Jets, Robert called him in 2017 after Kyle Shanahan, another former Texans assistant, was hired as the head coach of the 49ers and said, Kyle wanted me to reach out to you to see if you would be interested in joining our staff. And D'Amico thought about it, and he said, sure, yeah, I'd listen to him. And so Shanahan called him, he hired him, started at the bottom, worked his way up, defensive coordinator his last 2 years. Everybody talked about how he was going to make a great head coach, even though it's hard to predict. And I remember doing a column on him before the Texans played over there, his first season as a defensive coordinator. And at that point, he knew he wanted to be a head coach. And after that first year as a defensive coordinator in 2021, he did an interview. He had other interviews lined up and decided, I need to go back and spend another season as a defensive play caller. So he went back. It worked great. 5 teams had openings. Every one of them wanted to interview him. He interviewed with Denver. He interviewed with the Texans. He canceled the others. And the McNair family, Hannah and Cal and Janice, they wanted to hire him, but they don't make their general manager, Nick Caserio, do anything. But in that interview, it was a Zoom, first one was a Zoom. When it ended, Caserio turned back to them and said, we need to get him in here and not let him leave. And that's what he did. He came in for his interview. He just blew me away at his first news conference involving current players, former players, basically everybody in the organization. And
I was there. I remember he had all the jerseys.
You remember. And I asked him, why didn't you talk this well when you were a player? And he said, well, I'm in a different role now. So we still didn't know for sure. At this time last year, going into the 2023 season, we didn't know that they had no clue they were going to do as well as they did. I picked them to win 6 games. They'd won 3 years in a row, and they started 0-2. But then you started seeing things that he never had one clock management issue.
Yeah.
Not one play calling issue.
Which his predecessor, Bill O'Brien, had some time management issues, if I remember correctly.
Oh, and Bill got so mad when we'd ask him about it. We didn't have to ask D'Amico one time question because he had everything right. And I think a lot of that comes from playing, but also he's a really smart guy. Players run through walls for him. They respect the fact that he played. And he will jump on them when he has to jump on them, but he treats them with respect too. You don't hear him cussing out players like a lot of NFL coaches do. So the players respect him, they like him, and they would do anything for him.
Respect seems to be the biggest thing, and somebody that just now there's not even a question. I mean, it's amazing to me. You go back to the pre-draft process, the evaluation, the test, the questions. There were people who were almost seemingly trying to push CJ Stroud down farther so he would fall to somebody. There was the Bryce Young CJ Stroud debate. As we speak, obviously it's not a debate at all. But CJ Stroud in 1 year, much like DeMeco Ryans, I mean, he has completely turned around the perception, the energy, the buzz surrounding the Houston Texans. He's now an MVP candidate going into year two. You were watching him up close all last year. Whether it's the arm, whether it's the leadership, whether it's respect, what separates CJ Stroud? Because, John, you've covered Warren Moon. You've covered Deshaun Watson when he was good, when he was likable with the Houston Texans. Something is special. Something is different about CJ Stroud. What is it?
I remember reading some scouting reports about how his receivers made him look good at Ohio State, and that wouldn't translate to the NFL because he wouldn't have great receivers like he did at Ohio State. And that SC cognition test that he took that agents won't let their guys take anymore, in one area, he did poorly, and it was processing. And if you have a quarterback that can't process, you got a problem. Well, the Texans didn't subscribe to that. Not every team did, and they didn't have an issue with it. Now, remember last game of the season 2 years ago, they won in Indianapolis. They converted a 2-point conversion. They won, and we all went, "Oh my God, they've lost the first pick."
And I think I blame Lovie Smith for screwing it up, which he did.
Absolutely. They've lost the first pick. They've lost Bryce Young. They're going to get stuck with another one. And I got to tell you the truth, Brian, this time last year, Stroud hadn't done anything to make us go, wow, like Caleb Williams is doing in Chicago as the top overall pick. And in the first game, they got beat. Second game, Indianapolis, they got beat. But then the third game, they go to Jacksonville. Jacksonville is heavily favored to repeat as division champions, as the Texans are this year. And they beat them by 20 points. And the next week they came to play Pittsburgh. They beat Pittsburgh worse than any Houston team since the Oilers beat them in 1991. Wow. So they're 2-2, and all of a sudden you start thinking, this kid, boy, he's got a chance to be good, but we didn't have any idea he would be as good as he was. He doesn't have a great arm. What he has is great processing. He has very, very accurate. He's very cool under pressure. People say he can't run. Yeah, he can run, but it's like he said at the scouting combine. I had all those great receivers at Ohio State. What would they have said to me if I ran the ball instead of threw it to them?
Yeah.
Now he's got a similar situation with Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell. And he slides, he runs when he has to, he can pull up at the last minute and throw. He can make any throw on the field, and his timing and his accuracy and his decision making are pretty incredible.
Speaking with John McClain, longtime NFL beat writer, Houston Texans beat writer for Houston Chronicle, Hall of Fame voter, pretty much incomparable in terms of being an NFL beat writer all over the radio. And John, you covered the best Oilers teams. You've covered the best Texans teams. But entering this season, you saw the Astros in Houston and the Rockets. But I would imagine you're there now. I'm not. I'm in London. I would imagine it's not been like this in a while. Is there any time, maybe 2012, when they were at time early Super Bowl contenders and they had Watt in his prime and Brian Cushing, Arian Foster, Matt Schaub. They had a quarterback issue back then. Is there any period in Texans history that's comparable to this, or is this right now the most optimism and excitement that Texans fans have ever had?
Well, you remember in 2012, they finished with still a franchise best record of 12-4, won a first round game, then went to New England and got beat by Tom Brady and the Patriots. People were really fired up about that next season. Remember when they started 1-0, and then you and I go to San Diego, they went in overtime, they start 2-0, and we're figuring, boy, they're picking up right where they left off last year, and instead they never won another game. Gary Kubiak, the most popular coach in history, because DeMeco hadn't been around long enough to earn that distinction, and he ended up getting fired, and then they were awful. And when Bill O'Brien was here, Bill was so disliked and created so much controversy, and Houstonians didn't like him. Even when they won, you couldn't enjoy it. And that's why right now people are so fired up, and I caution them. My people get mad here when I say I don't think they're going to be a Super Bowl contender
Yeah.
this year, more like next year. Keep this in mind when you finish in last, you play a last place schedule. Last year they played the worst division in NFL, NFC South. Their crossover game was Arizona Cardinals here. This year they play a first place schedule. The crossover game is at the Cowboys. They
Yeah.
play 5 division champions, 11 teams. 11 games against teams that had winning records. And check out these quarterbacks, Brian. You got Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Tua Tagovailoa, Aaron Rodgers, Dak Prescott, and they will play Caleb Williams. They
Hmm.
also will play, I'm sure, Drake May of New England later in the year. J.J. McCarthy, they play in Minnesota the third game, but he's going to be out
Yeah.
after having a knee operation. But it's a murderer's row of
I was gonna
quarterbacks.
say Murderers Row, modern
It
NFL.
is, and they have brought in 15 unrestricted free agents on defense from other teams, 5 of their 9 draft choices, including their first with defense, and they re-signed 5 of their defensive free agents because they know D'Amico Ryan's defense has to be better against that schedule. Remember, this time last year, everybody was saying the same thing about Jacksonville. Jaguars had won the division. They had won a playoff game with a great comeback before losing a close one in the divisional round. I made a bet on the air with one of my co-hosts. He said Jaguars of the field. I said, "Oh, the Jaguars, $100." I paid up. So that it's a very cautionary tale that a lot of teams that finished in last are using the Texans as an example, and the Texans are using the Jaguars as an example of what can happen.
It's a great point. And you are one of the legends of radio, and you mentioned the Cowboys. It's a perfect segue. You know how big the Texans are, but also the Cowboys are a national team, international team. They were just valued at more than $10 billion, more than Real Madrid, more than Manchester United. They're the most valuable sports franchise in history. But for some reason, Jerry Jones is still on the fence about paying his stars. And they're entering a really tough period right now where they have a ton of talent, Micah Parsons, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb. But Jones is in the media every day talking about, we're going to string this out. Can we pay these guys? I don't want to overpay. They wanted on their terms. They don't know if they can keep everybody. What's going on with the Cowboys, and how has Jerry Jones gotten this team that has so much talent in this spot to where they can't win a big playoff game and they might have to break up this team before they even get close to a Super Bowl?
One of the things I feel from afar, and I've checked with 3 of my friends that cover the Cowboys, and then I checked with some of my friends and family members who are diehard Cowboy fans, and they say they haven't seen this much apathy toward the Cowboys since the Dave Campo area back in
Wow.
early 2000s. And there's several reasons. Jerry Jones didn't do anything in off season. He said he was all in. He didn't do squat. And while the Texans were trading and signing players and doing everything they can to try to elevate the franchise while CJ Stroud's on his rookie contract,
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Jones wasn't doing anything. He didn't bolster his running game. Everybody's wondering who's going to carry the ball for the Cowboys. That puts even more pressure on Dak Prescott. All you hear about the Cowboys all off season and now contracts, contracts,
Yeah.
contracts. Will Dak Prescott become the most expensive quarterback in history at $60 million a year? I believe he will because they can't keep him. If he wants to walk away and go on the open market after this season, he can do it. CeeDee Lamb, I think, will report before the first game. That's when they start paying them big game checks in the NFL. Right now, they don't make their big game checks. And I think they'll get it worked out, but Jerry Jones always has trouble with big contracts.
Yep.
He's never lost a player that he's really wanted over money, but they got a funny way of doing business. They won 12 games last year, and then they're ready, the upstart, youngest team in the league, the Packers, come in there at AT&T Stadium
Yep.
and humiliate them. And the Cowboys have not done anything to improve. Their defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn, went to Washington as head coach. They rehired Mike Zimmer, former defensive coordinator there and the head coach of the Vikings. And so we're eager to see. They better get off to a good start, because if they don't, that the criticism and the apathy are just going to be magnified.
Yeah, and Jerry also might have a head coach problem finally and realizing that Mike McCarthy's not the right guy. And who's sitting out there? Bill Belichick.